"It stands to reason," said Twombly, "that a man must accept the evidence of his own eyes, and when eyes and ears agree, there can be no doubt. He has to believe what he has both seen and heard." "Not always," put in Singleton softly. Every man turned toward Singleton. Twombly was standing on the hearth-rug, his back to the grate, his legs spread out, with his habitual air of dominating the room. Singleton, as usual, was as much as possible effaced in a corner, but when Singleton spoke, he said something. We faced him in that flattering spontaneity of expectant silence which invites utterance. "I was thinking," he said after an interval, "of something I both saw and heard in Africa." Now, if there was one thing we had found impossible, it had been to elicit from Singleton anything definite about his African experiences. As with the alpinist in the story, who could tell only that he went up and came down, the sum of Singleton's revelations had been that he went there and came away. His words now riveted our attention at once. Twombly faded from the hearth-rug, but not one of us could ever recall having seen him go. The room readjusted itself, focused on Singleton, and there was some hasty and furtive lighting of fresh cigars. Singleton lit one also, but it went out immediately, and he never relit it. 1. We were in the great forest exploring for pygmies. Van Rieten had a theory that the dwarfs found by Stanley and others were a mere cross-breed between ordinary Negroes and the real pygmies. He hoped to discover a race of men 3 feet tall at most, or shorter. We had found no trace of any such beings. Natives were few, game scarce, food, except game, there was none, and the deepest, dankest, drippingest forest all about. We were the only novelty in the country. No native we met had even seen a white man before. Most had never heard of white men. All of a sudden, one late afternoon, there came into our camp an Englishman, and pretty well used up he was, too. We had heard no rumor of him. He had not only heard of us, but had made an amazing 5-day march to reach us. His guide and 2 bearers were nearly as done up as he. Even though he was in tatters and had 5 days' beard on, you could see he was naturally dapper and neat, and the sort of man to shave daily. He was small but wiry. His face was the sort of British face from which emotion has been so carefully banished that a foreigner is apt to think the wearer of the face incapable of any sort of feeling. The kind of face which, if it has any expression at all, expresses principally the resolution to go through the world decorously, without intruding upon or annoying anyone. His name was Etcham. He introduced himself modestly, and ate with us so deliberately that we should never have suspected, if our bearers had not had it from his bearers, that he had had but 3 meals in the 5 days, and those small. After we had lit up, he told us why he had come. "My chief is very seedy," he said between puffs. "He is bound to go out if he keeps this way. I thought perhaps—" He spoke quietly in a soft, even tone, but I could see little beads of sweat oozing out on his upper lip under his stubby mustache, and there was a tingle of repressed emotion in his tone, a veiled eagerness in his eye, a palpitating inward solicitude in his demeanor that moved me at once. Van Rieten had no sentiment in him. If he was moved, he did not show it, but he listened. I was surprised at that. He was just the man to refuse at once, but he listened to Etcham's halting, diffident hints. He even asked questions. "Who is your chief?" "Stone," Etcham lisped. That electrified both of us. "Ralph Stone," we ejaculated together. Etcham nodded. Etcham made no answer, but looked him steadily in the eyes. "I beg pardon," Van Rieten hastened to say. "You startled me. They can't be carbuncles. He'd have been dead long ago." "I thought I had said they are not carbuncles," Etcham lisped. "But the man must be crazy," Van Rieten exclaimed. "Just so," said Etcham. "He is beyond my advice or control." "How many has he treated that way?" Van Rieten demanded. "Two, to my knowledge," Etcham said. "Two?" Van Rieten queried. Etcham flushed again. "I saw him," he confessed, "through a crack in the hut. I felt impelled to keep a watch on him, as if he was not responsible." "I should think not," Van Rieten agreed. "And you saw him do that twice?" "I conjecture," said Etcham, "that he did the like with all the rest." "How many has he had?" Van Rieten asked. "Dozens," Etcham lisped. "Does he eat?" Van Rieten inquired. "Like a wolf," said Etcham. "More than any two bearers." "Can he walk?" Van Rieten asked. "He crawls a bit, groaning," said Etcham simply. "Little fever, you say?" Van Rieten ruminated. "Enough and too much," Etcham declared. "Has he been delirious?" Van Rieten asked. "Only twice," Etcham replied. "Once when the first swelling broke, and once later. He would not let anyone come near him then. But we could hear him talking steadily, and it scared the natives." "Was he talking their patter in delirium?" Van Rieten demanded. "No," said Etcham. "But he was talking some similar lingo. Hamed Burgash said he was talking Balunda. I know too little Balunda. I do not learn languages readily. Stone learned more Mang Batu in a week than I could have learned in a year. But I seemed to hear words like Mang Batu words. Anyhow, the Mang Batu bearers were scared." "Scared?" Van Rieten repeated questioningly. "So were the Zanzibar men, even Hamed Burgash, and so was I," said Etcham, "only for a different reason. He talked in two voices." "In two voices?" Van Rieten reflected. "Yes," said Etcham, more excitedly than he had yet spoken. "In two voices, like a conversation. One was his own, one a small, thin, bleaty voice like nothing I ever heard. I seemed to make out, among the sounds the deep voice made, something like Mang Batu words I knew, as Nedru, Metebaba, and Nedo. They're terms for head, shoulder, thigh, and perhaps Kudra and Nekare, speak and whistle. And among the noises of the shrill voice, Matumipa, Anguzi, and Kamomami, kill, death, and hate. Hamed Burgash said he also heard those words. He knew Mang Batu far better than I." "What did the bearers say?" Van Rieten asked. "They said, 'Lukundoo, Lukundoo,'" Etcham replied. "I did not know that word. Hamed Burgash said it was Mang Batu for leopard." "It's Batu for witchcraft," said Van Rieten. "I don't wonder they thought so," said Etcham. "It was enough to make one believe in sorcery to listen to those two voices." "One voice answering the other?" Van Rieten asked perfunctorily. Etcham's face went gray under his tan. "Sometimes both at once," he answered huskily. "Both at once!" Van Rieten ejaculated. "It sounded that way to the men, too," said Etcham. "And that was not all." He stopped and looked helplessly at us for a moment. "Could a man talk and whistle at the same time?" he asked. "How do you mean?" Van Rieten queried. "We could hear Stone talking away, his big, deep-chested baritone rumbling along, and through it all we could hear a high, shrill whistle, the oddest wheezy sound. You know, no matter how shrilly a grown man may whistle, the note has a different quality from the whistle of a boy or a woman or a little girl. They sound more treble somehow. Well, if you can imagine the smallest girl who could whistle, keeping it up tunelessly right along, that whistle was like that, only even more piercing, and it sounded right through Stone's bass tones." "And you didn't go to him?" Van Rieten cried. "He is not given to threats," Etcham disclaimed. "But he had threatened, not volubly, nor like a sick man, but quietly and firmly, that if any man of us, he lumped me in with the men, came near him while he was in his trouble, that man should die. And it was not so much his words as his manner. It was like a monarch commanding respected privacy, stood silently. He was grateful all over." 4. Nothing but Etcham's fever of solicitude could have taken him in 5 days over the track. It took him 8 days to retrace with full knowledge of it, and our party to help. We could not have done it in 7, and Etcham urged us on in a repressed fury of anxiety, no mere fever of duty to his chief, but a real ardor of devotion, a glow of personal adoration for Stone, which blazed under his dry, conventional exterior and showed in spite of him. We found Stone well cared for. Etcham had seen to a good high thorn zareba round the camp. The huts were well built and thatched, and Stone's was as good as their resources would permit. Ahmed Burgash was not named after two Sayyids for nothing. He had in him the making of a sultan. He had kept the Mangbatu together. Not a man had slipped off, and he had kept them in order. Also, he was a deft nurse and a faithful servant. The two other Zanzibaris had done some creditable hunting. Though all were hungry, the camp was far from starvation. Stone was on a canvas cot, and there was a sort of collapsible camp stool table, like a Turkish taboret, by the cot. It had a water bottle and some vials on it, and Stone's watch, also his razor in its case. Stone was clean and not emaciated, but he was far gone, not unconscious, but in a daze, past commanding or resisting anyone. He did not seem to see us enter, or to know we were there. I should have recognized him anywhere. His boyish dash and grace had vanished utterly, of course, but his head was even more leonine. His hair was still abundant, yellow and wavy. The close, crisped, blond beard he had grown during his illness did not alter him. He was big and big-chested yet. His eyes were dull, and he mumbled and babbled mere meaningless syllables, not words. Etcham helped Van Rieten to uncover him and look him over. He was in good muscle for a man so long bedridden. There were no scars on him except about his knees, shoulders, and chest. On each knee and above it he had a full score of roundish cicatrices, and a dozen or more on each shoulder, all in front. 2 or 3 were open wounds, and 4 or 5 barely healed. He had no fresh swellings except 2, one on each side, on his pectoral muscles, the one on the left being higher up and farther out than the other. They did not look like boils or carbuncles, but as if something blunt and hard were being pushed up through the fairly healthy flesh and skin, not much inflamed. "I should not lance those," said Van Rieten, and Detcham assented. They made Stone as comfortable as they could, and just before sunset we looked in at him again. He was lying on his back, and his chest showed big and massive yet, but he lay as if in a stupor. We left Etcham with him, and went into the next hut, which Etcham had resigned to us. The jungle noises were no different there than anywhere else for months past, and I was soon fast asleep. 5. Sometime in the pitch dark I found myself awake and listening. I could hear 2 voices, one Stone's, the other sibilant and wheezy. I knew Stone's voice after all the years that had passed since I heard it last. The other was like nothing I remembered. It had less volume than the wail of a newborn baby, yet there was an insistent carrying power to it, like the shrilling of an insect. As I listened, I heard Van Rieten breathing near me in the dark. Then he heard me, and realized that I was listening, too. Like Etcham, I knew little Balunda, but I could make out a word or two. The voices alternated with intervals of silence between. Then suddenly both sounded at once, and fast. Stone's baritone basso, full as if he were in perfect health, and that incredibly stridulous falsetto, both jabbering at once like the voices of 2 people quarreling and trying to talk each other down. "I can't stand this," said Van Rieten. "Let's have a look at him." He had one of those cylindrical electric night candles. He fumbled about for it, touched the button, and beckoned me to come with him. Outside of the hut he motioned me to stand still, and instinctively turned off the light, as if seeing made listening difficult. Except for a faint glow from the embers of the bearer's fire, we were in complete darkness. Little starlight struggled through the trees. The river made but a faint murmur. We could hear the 2 voices together, and then suddenly the creaking voice changed into a razor-edged, slicing whistle, indescribably cutting, continuing right through Stone's grumbling torrent of croaking words. "Good God!" exclaimed Van Rieten. Abruptly he turned on the light. We found Etcham utterly asleep, exhausted by his long anxiety and the exertions of his phenomenal march, and relaxed completely now that the load was in a sense shifted from his shoulders to Van Rieten's. Even the light on his face did not wake him. The whistle had ceased, and the 2 voices now sounded together. Both came from Stone's cot, where the concentrated white ray showed him lying just as we had left him, except that he had tossed his arms above his head and had torn the coverings and bandages from his chest. The swelling on his right breast had broken. Van Rieten aimed the center line of the light at it, and we saw it plainly. From his flesh, grown out of it, there protruded a head, such a head as the dried specimens Etcham had shown us, as if it were a miniature of the head of a Balunda fetishman. It was black, shining black as the blackest African skin. It rolled the whites of its wicked wee eyes and showed its microscopic teeth between lips repulsively negroid in their red fullness, even in so diminutive a face. It had crisp, fuzzy wool on its minikin skull. It turned malignantly from side to side and chittered incessantly in that inconceivable falsetto. Stone babbled brokenly against its patter. Van Rieten turned from Stone and waked Etcham with some difficulty. When he was awake and saw it all, Etcham stared and said not one word. "You saw him slice off 2 swellings?" Van Rieten asked. Etcham nodded chokingly. "Did he bleed much?" Van Rieten demanded. "Very little," Etcham replied. "You hold his arms," said Van Rieten to Etcham. He took up Stone's razor and handed me the light. Stone showed no sign of seeing the light or of knowing we were there, but the little head mewled and screeched at us. Van Rieten's hand was steady, and the sweep of the razor even and true. Stone bled amazingly little, and Van Rieten dressed the wound as if it had been a bruise or scrape. Stone had stopped talking the instant the excrescent head was severed. Van Rieten did all that could be done for Stone, and then fairly grabbed the light from me. Snatching up a gun, he scanned the ground by the cot and brought the butt down once and twice viciously. We went back to our hut, but I doubt if I slept. 6. Next day, near noon, in broad daylight, we heard the 2 voices from Stone's hut. We found Etcham dropped asleep by his charge. The swelling on the left had broken, and just such another head was there, meowling and spluttering. Etcham woke up, and the 3 of us stood there and glared. Stone interjected hoarse vocables into the tinkling gurgle of the portent's utterance. Van Rieten stepped forward, took up Stone's razor, and knelt down by the cot. The atomy of a head squealed a wheezy snarl at him. Then suddenly Stone spoke English. "Who are you with my razor?" Van Rieten started back and stood up. Stone's eyes were clear now and bright. They roved about the hut. "The end," he said. "I recognize the end. I seem to see Etcham, as if in life. But Singleton, Singleton, ghosts of my boyhood come to watch me pass, and you, strange spectre with the black beard, and my razor, aroint ye all." "I'm no ghost, Stone," I managed to say. "I'm alive. So are Etcham and Van Rieten. We are here to help you." "Van Rieten!" he exclaimed. "My work passes on to a better man. Luck go with you, Van Rieten." Van Rieten went nearer to him. "Just hold still a moment, old man," he said soothingly. "It will be only one twinge." "I've held still for many such twinges," Stone answered quite distinctly. "Let me be. Let me die my own way. The Hydra was nothing to this. You can cut off 10, 100, 1,000 heads, but the curse you cannot cut off or take off. What's soaked into the bone won't come out of the flesh any more than what's bred there. Don't hack me any more. Promise." His voice had all the old commanding tone of his boyhood, and it swayed Van Rieten as it always had swayed everybody. "I promise," said Van Rieten. Almost as he said the word, Stone's eyes filmed again. Then we three sat about Stone and watched that hideous, gibbering prodigy grow up out of Stone's flesh, till two horrid, spindling little black arms disengaged themselves. The infinitesimal nails were perfect to the barely perceptible moon at the quick. The pink spot on the palm was horridly natural. These arms gesticulated, and the right plucked toward Stone's blond beard. "I can't stand this," Van Rieten exclaimed, and took up the razor again. Instantly Stone's eyes opened, hard and glittering. "Van Rieten break his word?" he enunciated slowly. "Never! But we must help you," Van Rieten gasped. "I am past all help and all hurting," said Stone. "This is my hour. This curse is not put on me. It grew out of me like this horror here. Even now I go." His eyes closed, and we stood helpless, the adherent figures spouting shrill sentences. In a moment Stone spoke again. "You speak all tongues?" he asked thickly. And the emergent Minikin replied in sudden English, "Yea, verily, all that you speak," putting out its microscopic tongue, writhing its lips and wagging its head from side to side. We could see the thready ribs on its exiguous flanks heave as if the thing breathed. "Has she forgiven me?" Stone asked in a muffled strangle. "Not while the moss hangs from the cypresses," the head squeaked. "Not while the stars shine on Lake Pontchartrain will she forgive." And then Stone, all with one motion, wrenched himself over on his side. The next instant he was dead. When Singleton's voice ceased, the room was hushed for a space. We could hear each other breathing. Twombly, the tactless, broke the silence. "I presume," he said, "you cut off the little Minikin and brought it home in alcohol." Singleton turned on him a stern countenance. "We buried Stone," he said, "unmutilated as he died." "But," said the unconscionable Twombly, "the whole thing is incredible." Singleton stiffened. "I did not expect you to believe it," he said. "I began by saying that although I heard and saw it, when I look back on it, I cannot credit it myself." 1907.